Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Deanne Mazzocchi, Illinois 47th House District and Elmhurst, Illinois resident. Government 101 starts with keeping your streets safe from violent people. Governor Pritzker has been touting his so-called success with criminal justice reform. I'd like to know what he considers to be a failure. So far in Chicago, we're halfway through the year, and we have the highest murder rate that many of us have ever seen. Why is this happening? It's happening because of bad government policies that prioritize predators over people. And innocent victims in our local neighborhoods are being terrorized. Cook County decided a few years back that they would embrace policies that keep people arrested for crimes, including violent crimes, out of jail. How's that working out? Well, law enforcement may not be defunded, but they're certainly demoralized. Even though Illinois bans gun possession without a valid firearm owner's ID card, and the Chicago Police Department has stepped up arrests of offenders who are carrying illegal guns, what happens to them? Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx lets them go. She calls them nonviolent, as long as that gun wasn't actually used or just fired at that time. And these lawbreakers are released back to the streets. When you have a revolving door at the courthouse when it comes to gun crimes, you can't expect gun violence to go down. And we're not just seeing this in Cook County. This is having a spillover effect all throughout the collar counties as well. In my home county of DuPage County, we've seen a rise in all sorts of crimes. We've seen rises in burglary and carjacking, and where our local county sheriff has estimated that on any given day, probably 40% of the people in his jail have Cook County or Chicago addresses. Now, it's bad enough that Chicago has chosen to follow these failed policies that are hurting our local counties, but Governor Pritzker is being backed by people who want these same policies signed into law for the entire state of Illinois. And in fact, he has signed many of these types of provisions into law for the entire state of Illinois. And while he got to 60 votes for them in the House, there was bipartisan opposition against them. Governor Pritzker is failing at the single most important duty that we entrust to our government, keeping our residents safe and secure in their homes and their neighborhoods. And while he talks quite a lot about equity, he's helping to take failed soft on crime policies statewide. That's not more equitable for crime victims, and it's certainly not more equitable for people whose neighborhoods are under attack and are unsafe. By continuing to pass legislation that ties the hands of our courts, our state's attorneys, and law enforcement without a full picture of the potential consequences, the Democrats in the General Assembly and Governor Pritzker continue to do a disservice to our law enforcement officers and, more importantly, to the safety of the people that we represent. I'd now like to turn the floor over to State Representative Amy Elick.
Good morning, everyone. I'm State Representative Amy Elick. I represent portions of Madison and Jersey counties. I join Leader Durkin and Representative Mazzocchi in sharing my sympathy for the families and friends that have lost a loved one as a result of the violent crime that continues to hurt the residents of our state. I'm very frustrated and saddened to read in the news, including the national news, each week about another death as a result of violence in our state. Some of these fatalities could have been prevented if criminals were not so easily released back on the streets and if the legislature actually proved their support for crime victims by getting tough on crime. Over the 4th of July weekend in Chicago, 108 people were shot, 17 died. Last weekend, 40 people were shot, 11 died. That's a total of 148 people shot in just the last 2 weeks and 28 lives lost. Something must be done to stop the violence. The anti-law enforcement, pro-criminal policies coming from the legislature unfortunately won't solve the problem. These policies only make the violence worse. Recently, a new law was signed that will entirely eliminate cash bail in the next 2 years. This law should be repealed immediately. Cook County has lowered its bail requirements, and we see the result, an increase in violent crime. All the talk about defunding our police and making it more difficult for law enforcement to do their job must end today. Law enforcement needs our support. Crime victims need our support. The Illinois legislature is getting too soft on crime. It's time for the legislature to back our men and women in blue and get serious about protecting our residents' lives, property, and safety. Now I'll pass the mic to Leader Jim Durkin.
Thank you very much, Representative Ellick. My name is Jim Durkin. I am the state representative of the 82nd District. I live in Cook County. My district encompasses not only Cook, but also DuPage and Will County. I am the House Minority Leader. And also, I'm a former and assistant Cook County State's Attorney who served 5 years at 26 in California. And I've tried cases, I've investigated cases, and I have participated in thousands of bond hearings. This morning, I listened to many Democrat leaders, Governor Pritzker, State's Attorney Kim Foxx, and countless others pat themselves on the back in a real group hug type of moment for the reform of the criminal justice system in Illinois and how they think this will make Illinois a better state. But let me be clear, I support reform if it makes sense. My record speaks of that. But the only comments missing today from their remarks is the plague of gun violence that has tormented neighborhoods, north, south, east, and west, and has destroyed innocent lives in Illinois, particularly young Illinoisans, at a staggering pace. Just think of one girl in particular, Jocelyn Adams, who this past summer was murdered while waiting in line at a McDonald's drive-up while in the car with her father in the west side of Chicago. It's a real life. That's an Illinoisan. To Governor Pritzker, State's Attorney Foxx, Chief Judge Evans, violent crime in Chicago is no longer a local problem. It is a state of Illinois problem. When you demoralize the men and women who wear the badge, it sends a message that makes it to the streets, and it is reflected in the surge of violence and the staggering number of criminal acts that we see day in, day out. It's important for everyone when they hear the following numbers to look one step further and remember that each number represents a real person, an Illinois citizen. So far in Chicago in 2021, 750 real people, Illinoisans, have had a gun pulled on them and their car stolen, many times with friends or family and children with them. That's called carjacking. So far in Chicago in 2021, approximately 400 Illinois citizens have lost their lives and countless people lost someone they cared about. That is called first-degree murder. So far in Chicago, in 2021, over 1,000 people have suffered through the horrendous crime of sexual assault. It's called rape. All of these people in all their backgrounds are victims of an ever-increasing crime that is taking over our streets and our neighborhoods. For the past few years, all we've heard from the Democrats is a need for criminal justice reform. But let me tell you right now that the changes that have been made, specifically what was passed back in January, will not work. In Cook County, we see firsthand the effects of making bail affordable for even the most hardened of criminals. We know of at least 26 people who have been accused of murder, attempted murder, or using a firearm in Chicago while on bond for previous felonies. There are over 100 people on electronic monitoring who are accused of murder or attempted murder. Yes, 100 people who've been charged with murder and attempted murder are now on the streets of Chicago wearing a bracelet. In the House of Representatives, we've spent days debating bills about gun possession and how to make sure we protect lawful gun owners while making sure those who shouldn't possess a firearm don't. But in Cook County, State's Attorney Foxx doesn't think that the illegal possession of a loaded firearm is related to the surge of violence we see. And across the state, after years of Democrat politicians demonizing the police, we see massive officer retirements in Chicago and elsewhere, leading to low clearance rates and overwhelmed response times. The criminal justice system, the system put in place to protect everyone's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, is falling apart in Illinois. In the last few weeks, we've seen just about every Democrat politician in Cook County try to blame each other, but the fact is we are all responsible, and the time to change course is now. This past year, we've seen the governor sign a bill that will make a failed Cook County bail system approach in every state, in every county within the state. This failed approach in Cook County has put violent gang members, back on the street, and then they do what they do best. They commit more violent crimes. We just can't let that happen. What is happening right now in Cook County, because of the chief judge's general order 3 years ago, and this horrible spike in violence from individuals who should not be on the street, is a precursor of what we should expect in 2 years, when we have no cash bail. We have seen the state show a blatant disregard for crime victims, the police, instead of embracing habitual criminals. We have a chief judge that believes in the honor system. Get that, the honor system for hardened street gang members. We have a state's attorney who believes that the possession of a loaded gun is not a serious offense. To everyone who has been a victim of a violent crime or shooting only to see the offender days after back on the street, I'm sorry. I apologize to you. I apologize on behalf of the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois has failed you. Governor Pritzker and the Democrats' approach to criminal justice is coming up short, and all of us are suffering. Not only Chicago, but the suburbs, the collar counties, and everywhere in the state of Illinois. We need to get to work and fix the many wrongs that General Assembly and the governor have done to victims of crime across our state.